What is it?
It's a new flag!
Yeah, but what's it supposed to be of?
It's a
Moon.
doing Zumba! But note the eyes! His confusion from his poor coordination is compounded by his inability to express his emotions!
Why does it have an erection?
For glory, Zorro! For glory!
Ocarina of Time is easily one of the most strange games for me. It's nowhere near my favorite Zelda game, but something about it keeps me constantly revisiting it all the time. As I play through it, I don't struggle whatsoever, and I guess that leaves a bit of a bias against the game with my vast knowledge of it. I tend to love what the game has to offer, but I also tend to groan at it at the same time. Lots of the mechanics of Ocarina of Time seem to pigeonhole the player into a strategy of waiting almost constantly. And while this doesn't take up all of the game, most of it definitely does leave the player having to wait for something. Wait so this ship can move. Wait until this Poe is visible. Wait until this clam opens its mouth. This isn't a flawed concept at all, and people who usually have this problem, based on what I've seen, don't really know what goes into game design.
But sliding spiked death pucks coming out from around the corner you can't see is just bad fucking design. It's bad design in any game. It's no different in Zelda. You don't get a get out of jail free card. You gotta roll 3 times!
But the waiting can be annoying when the game drags you by the nose. You can't go to Death Mountain until the game tells you that you're allowed to. Despite the interesting aspects and concepts of the gameplay, much of it feels undercooked or like it doesn't get to shine. Part of this is because it doesn't really have a well-realized or interesting world, as most of the exploration is you finding holes that lead to caves with like one item in them. But the world in it of itself, having little in the way of creativity, is completely made up for by the various bits of lore sprinkled throughout the game in a subtle fashion. You explore some of this lore in the Bigoron Sword segment, a segment that is much more rewarding than the reward itself, which ends up being a blade that makes the easy combat even easier. Even though most of the bosses, enemies, and so on only take 2 or 3 hits to kill, it still definitely has a lot in the way of narrative, aesthetic, and personality. Not to mention how revolutionary it was for not only the Zelda series, but gaming in general, especially with how 3D games handled combat from that point forward. As soon as the game was out on November 21st, 1998, almost exactly 1 year before I was brought into the world, the game became a success. Not only is it in the top 10 best-selling Nintendo 64 games of all time, but it's considered by so many to be an absolute masterpiece. Obviously, with all this hype, it was time for them to make a sequel. Beta to Ocarina of Time was definitely a fascinating part of it. They had 6 years to make the game, and so many ideas were scrapped before it came out. It was actually at one point going to be in first person, and later was even meant to be structured just like Super Mario 64. They had a lot of time to put this thing together, and were given a sixth of that time to make an entire sequel to it with a fully realized plot and world. That is why Majora's Mask was an almost necessary follow-up, given my Ocarina of Time analysis. This game is one of the weirdest games to even exist for a handful of reasons. It's much longer, and has more content than Ocarina of Time. I actually kind of prefer it in terms of quality. I know that a lot of people might roll their eyes upon hearing that, as that statement is far from being a hot take, but Majora's Mask is, in my opinion at least, the greatest Zelda game yet. On top of that, it's also my second favorite game of all time. With how well done it is, you wouldn't think it was made in only a year, but the strange thing is that it was. They couldn't just shit a sequel out, they had to go above and beyond to make it as good a sequel as they possibly could. Most people would think a game would end up horrible with these conditions, but Majora was not. It wasn't bad because of these conditions at all. In fact, without them, I highly doubt it would have been nearly as good as it is. In this video, I will be talking about many things in this game and touching on just about everything, but one of the most important parts of this game is that its artsy, philosophical, surreal, horrifying, dark, disturbing nature is a genuine depiction of what went into the development of this game. The game has you reside in this place that you don't recognize and haven't been to before. You have 3 days before Moon comes crashing into Termina as per the Skull Kid. He intends to kill everyone with this, and it's your job to stop him. Yeah. This game has a time limit, and if you wait too long, it's game over. And while you can turn the clock back whenever you want with the Song of Time you get later, that doesn't make the Moon's gaze any less chilling. It has this impending doom going for it, the stress of having this monster loom over you, and the realization that he's getting closer as the time passes. All you have to do is look up, and there he is. Right there. Ready to fuck the shit out of the earth. I pray my dick get big as the Eiffel Tower, so I can fuck the world for 72 hours. So, you've heard all this before. Everyone has talked about how horrifying this moon is and how much stress it puts onto the player. It is the biggest priority in the game, and as a consequence, it makes the player feel constantly uneasy as time goes on. It's been said before so many times that me making these points is kind of stale, but that's not why I'm bringing up the moon. The way I see it, I think that the stressful conditions of this game's development period are what this moon is meant to represent. The developers only had a year to get this game out, so it's clear that a lot of stress went into the development of this game, and I think the moon is meant to be a bit of symbolism to represent that. In a way, the release date of the game and the pressure it puts onto the creators correlates with the impending doom of the moon and the pressure it puts onto the player. This is something I admire about the game probably the most. It's the developers expressing how making the game made them feel, and that's honestly amazing. Sure, Majora's Mask is a game with no shortage of praise going for it. You could probably click off of this video and find plenty of other video essays talking about this game's themes, ideas, and complexity. To some of my friends, it has been kind of perceived as the pretentious wannabe hipster's pick for the best Zelda game exclusively for its artsy, mature, and dark story, complex gameplay, and philosophical themes of what it means to accept your death. This game was a huge hit, and even though it didn't sell near as well as Ocarina of Time, it's still being given constant 9 and 10 out of 10 ratings from places like IGN and Nintendo Power. I am one of the people who would also give this game a 10 out of 10, even if things about it aged poorly. So without further ado, this is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, a monotonous masterpiece.
Dawn of the first day. Death, realism, and the story.
The story is simple to understand, which is imperative for a game made for children. Despite how dark it is and the fact that the story has ideas that adults might understand and appreciate more than kids, this is still an E-rated title and needs to be easy enough to get. What makes that difficult is that it involves time travel, which can easily get confusing and complicated. If it's not obvious what the story to Majora's Mask's main theme is, it's death. But it's not really that simple. It's more that it's the 5 stages of grief, whether it be accepting your own demise or accepting the loss of a loved one. It's about life before passing, your place in the world, and whether you fulfilled your role or your destiny well enough before you die. This is heavy material given the target audience, and thus these ideas might not be fully understood as a result. But this takes me to the most important aspect of the story: time travel and turning back time to start over. This ability is an important part of the story purely for the fact that it's symbolic of grief. You go back again and again and again in this game, repeating the same 3 days over and over. In a way, that's what grief in and of itself is. It can feel like the same thing, regurgitated to a monotonous degree, and the game captures this flawlessly. Majora's Mask is the least like any Zelda game, and many people have formed theories on what exactly it's supposed to be saying. If you remember back in Ocarina of Time, Link placed the sword back into the pedestal, and it's assumed that Navi flew off because she didn't want Link to see her die. Him being unaware of her death leads him to the Lost Woods. That's just a theory. There is no confirmation, but I like that idea a lot because it really does benefit what the game is trying to get across very, very well. Now, there's also theories that Link dies in Majora's Mask, but those got debunked. Sure, it could explain the themes of death that are heavy throughout the game, but to treat it as a direct reason is false. In my personal opinion, the themes of death are Link attempting to move on from Navi. It could be him struggling with the realization that she's gone, given this whole journey started because he was looking for her. But that's just a theory! I'm not fucking doing this stupid bit. Fuck you. I would say, though, that idea seems a lot more interesting than Link being dead. That said, I do think that this is a mental journey for Link and a look into his character. We get to know our little hero a lot better than we did. In a way, this journey is Link looking back on his life as the hero and coming to terms with it. Many have even described this as Link's identity crisis, and I 100% agree with that assertion. He was a young child and never really got to become an adult, at least mentally. This is why the masks are important to the story. Link, at a very young age, has already had all these responsibilities thrusted on him, but he was never really given the chance to be himself. He searches for Navi, as he struggles to find his own identity, and instead has to go through the many masks that he was forced to wear. He must take them off one by one, to see what his face is like underneath. Towards the start of the game, when you meet Skull Kid, you see that he has 2 fairy friends named Tattle and Tail. You know, Tattle, Tail, get it? Like a tattletale. I love these fairies, and I know that probably might be a bit confusing given I hate Navi like everyone else on the internet. But Tail, and more specifically Tattle, are much more likable than her. I think the biggest change that should be addressed is Tattle's bell, which I think is a great replacement for the annoying hey.
Hey! Listen! Watch out!
Hey! You better watch out, you better watch out, you better watch out, you better watch out, You better watch.
Another thing that I love about Tattle is that this time her hints are largely optional, whereas Navi's often forced you to stop everything and listen to what she has to say. More than the improvements, however, is how Tattle is a genuine character and not just a guide. When you run into her, she will apologize for the things that she did. It's actually emphasized by a scene of her flying back and forth to Link, which is just to be cute and paint her out as some sort of tsundere, but it's interesting because it's a visual representation of Tattle flying high to emphasize how she sees Link as beneath her, but she'll come back down to his level to reassure him. It's because she's depending on him, and this view she has of him will slowly begin to change as the game takes its course. I will talk more about the visual presentation and so forth much later in the video. For now, we have to talk about the Happy Mask sales. This man is creepy, and he makes it pretty clear off the bat that he needs your help to find his mask that got taken away.
I want my fucking Big Mac, you piece of shit! Give me my fucking Big Mac right fucking now, you cunt! I swear I'll fucking kill you!
Right off the bat, upon meeting him, it's very easy for the player to not feel especially secure around him, and certainly not trustworthy. As I said, throughout life, Link has had to wear many masks without ever getting to reveal what's underneath. The salesman is just that. A salesman who supplies these masks. But in his journey, he is here not to give Link more, but to send him on a journey to find the very one that eats at him, whether he realizes it does or not. He's almost like a Grim Reaper in a way. Creepy, untrustworthy, deceitful, but in a way that makes him feel mysterious. For now, the situation is that the Mask of Majora has possessed a Skull Kid. This is actually horrifying watching it carry him by his face, because it makes me feel like it has these tentacles that pierce your skin and crawl throughout your body, infesting you with its magic. And this is only subtly implied by its anatomy in the final boss, but it is a very horrifying thought. The Majora's Mask is a representation of grief in and of itself, but the bad side of it. It seeks destruction and annihilation for everything in its path. According to the manga, it started as a beast that was lonely, and now its spirit preys on the loneliness of the Skull Kid, hoping to destroy the world that had left it alone and isolated in its life. We learn that Skull Kid was a child that was very tormented with that same loneliness and desperation for friends. Later in the game, when he's freed from its power, he comes to actually regret his mischievous nature, but it became clear early on that he only acted the way he did simply because he wanted attention and nobody would give it to him. He's a vulnerable kid, with many insecurities and regrets, and it feasts upon those insecurities and regrets. I think what's interesting is that masks, several times throughout the game, are made clear to be lingering spirits. It's the face of someone who has passed. So many of them hold a lot of symbolic meaning. You have this one from the Great Fairy, which you get by finding her missing piece. Each of the Great Fairies are shattered, left incomplete, the same way Link feels with his various masks he was forced to wear. One of my favorites is the Bremen mask, which was stolen by Guru Guru due to his jealousy. He's a man who places a smile on his face like a mask, despite being frustrated with how the world treats him. After he confesses his sins, he feels immense guilt, but rewards you for listening to his confession. The quest is actually based on a myth about animals that decide to leave their owners to become traveling musicians, hence why it gives you the ability to make animals march. These animals felt past their prime, which again correlates well with the feeling of isolation during death, that you feel like you've done all there is to do, and now there's nothing left but to march. There's also the fact that the marching has these animals age fast, which gives me some Peter Pan vibes, but I also think that's a way of correlating with Link himself in the last game. Such a young age, and yet he's just supposed to become an adult and save the world, which is also symbolized by the fact that he physically does become an adult. I like that you can control the dog in town now. It attacked you as a scrub. Oh, what a cute little oh fuck! But now it's following you. It gives a sense of perspective and status, although it's very small and nothing really to write home about. There's a guy who owns these cuckoos, and his only regret is that he won't be able to see them grow up. It's a sense of sadness that his impending death is going to ruin the future he wanted to see with his little cuckoos who give his life a purpose. You've got the Bomb Mask, which is given to you for standing up and being a hero, which was your role in the world anyway. Oh, fuck! we straight up killed someone, holy shit! I like how the guard's sitting right there and he just kind of lets him leave. Yeah, it's real cool. There's the Kamaro mask, which contains a spirit with the lingering regret of not having the impact he wanted in life. He wanted his dance that he had formed to exist, and he never really got the chance to do that. You have the Soldier of the Stone Mask, who is invisible and can't be seen by the naked eye. He blames himself due to his own inability to understand his own death. You've got the Mask of Sense, which is probably the most worthless one in the game since it only serves as a long and drawn-out method of getting blue potions, which you can already easily get by the time this mask is available to you, but the journey to get it expands the lore a bit and sheds some light on the Deku mask that you have. It's essentially free character development that the player only gets if they take the optional route of playing through this minigame, and I like that a lot. Not every symbol or theme of death in this game is necessarily 100% serious. For example, this is Tingle. He's a grown man who apparently has a strange obsession with fairies. Also, I can't look at him without thinking of that iconic iDubbbz meme.
Jump down, and then say some fucking gay shit.
I am a homosexual.
His quirkiness is hilarious, but of course his only real purpose is to give the player a map if they so choose. I would say the Ghost Hand is a much more humorous take on the game's approach to death, showing that it's not all about sadness and misery. I'd like to seriously imagine just strolling to the bathroom in a midnight drunken stupor and, well, it's fucking disgusting.
Wow. They just put the finger up the ass?
What do you mean? I have my ass finger. What are you talking about?
But that's because this game is anything but afraid to show its personality to the player. For example, if you wear a Gibdo mask, you can make Redeads dance. Yeah, things like this are just fucking hilarious, and I'm so glad they included it in this game, because it's just too good. There's also when you go to the giant snake den to save the seahorses, and they kiss and give you a heart piece. Like, that's just really cute. Although, there's this sign outside of it that warns you about the murky water. Yeah, you know, home of a bunch of giant man-eating snakes. But watch out! The water's murk! The game is structured by the 5 stages of grief in order, because the areas you encounter one by one are each representing one of each. First you have denial in Clocktown, anger in the swamp, bargaining in Snowhead, depression in the Great Bay, and acceptance at Stone Tower. So we're going to go through these stages in order of how the game presents them, starting with denial. Clocktown is absolutely filled with denial to the point that it's a bit disheartening. Obviously, as I said, the moon is going to come crashing into Earth in 3 days, but the people don't really care that much. In fact, they're holding a carnival the day the moon will come crashing down. You have this swordmaster who exclaims that he's going to cut the moon in half, because I'm sure he definitely has the ability to do something like that. There's a scene where the carpenters and mayor have this obnoxious argument in the mayor's office where he says that they're going to still hold the carnival despite the moon because the moon isn't really going to crash. Some people are terrified and others are just consistently in denial. There's the specific instance where the event that was planned for the Zora concert ended up getting cancelled, and the lady specifically says, there's always next year, implying that the very reason you cancelled this event isn't even going to have that big an effect. We'll still have next year to do it. Once you get to the swamp, there's a lot of anger to go around, and most of the people who feel this way have no idea why. This segment is definitely fun, though. It's revealed in this section, as well, that you are currently wearing the mask of the dead Deku Scrub child you met at the beginning, who was likely killed by the Skull Kid. It's handled rather subtly, and almost to a depressive degree, as you discover the butler who fathered said kid got too caught up in a race with you due to his pain and longing for the past. Perhaps he's taking his anger at his son's loss out on you. It actually makes the part in the credits where he weeps for his lost son even more painful. But the most obvious indication of anger is the tribe, and more specifically the king. His daughter has disappeared, and the only one who had any connection to her is the monkey. So he decides to take the initiative of punishing the monkey without even trying to understand where his daughter is gone. The ritual scene just before you enter the temple is disturbing, especially since the monkey did nothing wrong. His eyes look absolutely lifeless as he's dunked into the water. It's unsettling and dark. You get to see firsthand what happens when people take their justified anger out irrationally on everyone else. You get to see the destructive nature of it, without the realization that this is the same reason the Skull Kid is going to kill everyone. That said, I do like the moment after the dungeon when you end up saving her. Obviously, she asks me to carry her in something, so now I have an effective way to transport those immigrants across the border without being caught by security and tried for 10 counts of human trafficking and 7 counts of organized bombings in the state of Texas from 2015 to 2016. Snowhead is filled with a lot of bargaining, both from a business standpoint and from a desperately longing standpoint. You have the baby that cries out for his father, incapable of understanding. You have the most obvious scene of Darmani imploring Link to bring him back to life, and when that doesn't work, he begs you to heal his soul. Later on, you actually end up continuing his legacy and easing his regrets by using the power of his spirit to defeat the beast he set out to kill. Afterwards, there's a scene a lot of people probably missed and don't know about, where these Gorons praise you for your victory, and I found the scene quite wholesome and cute, but it is admittedly sad that none of these Gorons know that Darmani is dead. The credit goes to Darmani instead of you, as you were the one who continued his legacy using his lingering spirit. I think the best example of bargaining are these two rather interesting characters. They run a blacksmith business, and they're actually really cool. You see this man who is clearly not very bright, but filled with brawn, working alongside this scummy, lazy man who is very clearly just taking advantage of his strength and making a profit off of it. I'm convinced that these guys could have just made a sword without any gold dust and just used it as cocaine. Anyway, it's not exclusively limited to just this area, as there is a Zora who you can teach a specific tune to, and he'll bargain with you to keep quiet that he stole it. What a fucking dick. There's even this haunted house you go into, filled with gold scatulas, and once you complete it, this random dude comes in to bargain with you to let him buy the place as shelter in the hopes that he'll be safe here from the moon. The next stage is depression, and there's plenty of it to go around. This guy sits and cowers in fear as he realizes pretty quickly he bought a haunted place off of you. It's pretty clear he's still fearful of what's to come and not ready to accept it. One of the first things you encounter at Great Bay is a Zora rockstar floating in the water. Once you push him to shore, he walks forward a bit before singing out his regrets and anguish and then dying. This example in particular is a little hard to take seriously. Oh! Doesn't even rhyme, you fucking idiot.
Horrible. Granted, you have talent.
I can eat that pussy.
There's a Zora lady who is very clearly depressed because her eggs have been taken away.
Hey.
Her band as well is panicking because they don't know if they can perform and they have a concert very soon. The leader on top of that is an arrogant bastard who refuses to let the band's creativity flow and only harmonizes with something that the other members created when it's accidentally played by someone he barely knows. It's clear that this band doesn't have much in the way of communication. The lack of trust makes the jam they made up seem like something that could never go to their leader to play, and this really builds up a lot of bad blood and distrust of each other these members seem to have. Even worse, there's a diary entry from the lead singer in which she begs Mikau not to do anything drastic now that her eggs are gone, but because she lost her voice, she was incapable of reaching out to him, and now he's gone. It's pretty heart-wrenching to say the least, but it shows the pain of grief almost perfectly. The next and final stage is acceptance, which is the most important stage as it builds into the conclusion. You have this Poe Ghost minigame, but its inclusion feels a bit odd. You pay this guy to fight to your own death, and that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but that's the point. It's an ironic game that stands as a metaphor for what life in it of itself is. You reap what you sow, and you pay for your own death. Each of these spirits linger on because they can't accept their death, and the game allows you to release them from this. Later on, you run into the Composer brothers who died with a vicious hatred of each other, but upon learning the Song of Storm from one and teaching it to the other, you allow that broken bond to mend once more, even in death. He accepts the mistreatment of siblings, but he only accepts it through a song that his brother has created. Not the Song of Healing, because it does nothing for him, but instead the love he still has in his heart for his brother. There's the Skull Kita, in which you chase after him, but are held back by walls of fire and waves of his soldiers. He sees himself as mighty, and his passionate fire in his heart keeps you from reaching him. That fight still lingers, and this battle is a clear indicator of that. Afterwards, he accepts that he is no longer alive, accepts that he lost the war he fought in, and moves on, leaving it all behind. This part's amazing because you have Link quietly saluting the Skull Kita to excuse him. It's fucking genius, and it parallels with the acceptance of his death. He finally gives him permission to let go, awarding you the Kita Mask. Afterwards, you have the fight with Dewey Kana, my favorite fight in the game. Once the fight is over, they come to accept that it is past their time and they are no longer needed. You have the various fights with the Garo ninjas who refuse to accept death on anyone's terms but their own. Every time you kill one, they will blow themselves up before they die, refusing to leave behind a corpse. You have the well being filled with Gibdos who desire things, and you fulfill each and every one of their final wishes, no matter how simple they might be. Although I think someone's last and final wish being a small bug is a little ridiculous. There's even this cute scene at Romani Ranch where Cremia speaks of her father's death, and how it left her with all these responsibilities of taking care of the ranch, but she seems so upbeat and happy. She even giggles to herself over a sales pitch she came up with for her milk. It's one of the most heartwarming parts of the game, since Link looks so damn happy to see his horses okay. The Stone Tower Temple being flipped upside down is the game's way of saying that death can really turn your whole world upside down. It has these opponents you can flip manually and whose anger upon doing so leads to their downfall. I also love the story of Anju and her lover Cafe, who are forced to accept the reality of their situation. He's reverted to the state of a child, left vulnerable. It shows both why we value life, and symbolizes the moment your mind races back to the past. The side quest of Anju and Cafe is the most intricate and detailed side quest in the entire game. It's long, has the most specific events you have to be there for at specific times, and you get a lot of upgrades out of it. It works because the player becomes involved in an entire side story.
Nice.
Majora's Mask is probably the best ending to any game I might have ever seen in my entire life. With each of the 4 condemnations lifted, Link hops on the clock tower at 12 p.m. on the 3rd day to stand up to the Skull Kid once more and request the 4 giants who end the moon's plummet. The 4 who are here come together and they lift the weight of the moon. Throughout this entire experience, the moon has symbolized impending doom, but going through the stages of grief lifts the weight and brings you a sense of ease as you pass. It doesn't stop there, however, as the mask separates from its host and flies into the mouth of the moon. It's revealed that it was an entity that ate up the Skull Kid inside and out. Skull Kid's loneliness correlates in a way with the feeling of isolation accompanying death. Majora preyed on that, and that's why you must have the strength to destroy it and be at peace. When you enter the moon, you're in a large open grass field with a single tree at the center and a bunch of kids that resemble happy mask salesmen. The lone tree could potentially be a symbol for the Tree of Life, the beginning of humanity juxtaposed to the end of the world as the moon was threatening to kill everyone. Interacting with these kids, as long as you have all the masks, is representative of Link's mental journey. You're given these trials you must endure, giving up more and more of your masks as you go through, so that you can leave them behind to get in touch with what's underneath. Each of the kids as well, after each trial, asks you a philosophical question. The first asks you if your friends throughout life were ever really your friends. Link's friends were there for him, but they were only there to benefit him on the journey he was thrusted into. He never felt for a second that he had anyone he could rely on because it was his journey, not theirs. The second asks about what it was that made you happy, wondering if it makes other people happy too. Link wonders about what it is that he wants as opposed to what everyone else wants, and wonders if he really wanted to be the hero. The third questions his status of a hero, wondering if doing the right thing can genuinely be what makes people happy. And finally, the fourth asks him who he really is, what his true face looks like. Link approaches the fifth with the conclusion he needed. He finally finds happiness in the role he was given. He made others happy by being a hero and saving the day. He accepts the fact that someday he's going to die, knowing he left behind a legacy. The story of Majora's Mask is complex, filled to the brim with symbolism, metaphors, and complex ideas about what it means to accept your death, finding your true identity and overcoming that feeling of isolation before death. It's an artsy, philosophically rich story that I want to remind you is rated E for everyone. The story pursues its 5 stages of grief in a subtle fashion that many children who play might not be able to internalize on a conscious level, but it will more than likely leave a subconscious impact on them. It isn't just praised for being dark. It's praised for being one of the most mature and well-written stories in gaming, which is even more impressive given that this is a Zelda game.
Dawn of the second day. Combat, exploration, and gameplay.
Before I get into the gameplay at all, I need to make something very clear. As many of you know, the Ocarina of Time video was partially inspired by Egoraptor's video tearing it apart. I wanted to expand on his points and talk about things he missed or just got wrong, and the same applies to this video, where I will be discussing content from a different person. Many of you already know what I'm talking about, but I am dedicating a good portion of this in response to the Angry Video Game Nerd review, which there will be a link to in the description. This video was entertaining as per the usual AVGN review, and if you think I'm going to be harshly criticizing him in this video, that is far from the truth. I love his content, and I actually liked this video too. I highly recommend you go watch it for yourself, as it does bring up many points which are completely valid. That said, even though a good deal of it was fair, there are a handful of points I think probably need to be addressed. So of course I will be referencing his points throughout the video multiple times in an attempt to expand on them and maybe talk about where he might have gone wrong, or what I agree with him on. In addition, this segment will also be a response to not just one video, but a series of videos, or more specifically, an incomplete Let's Play from the popular channel Game Grumps. And this playthrough was pretty bad. I actually also recommend you watch through their playthrough so as to see that I'm not taking Aaron out of context in the few moments that I reference it. But I want to make it clear that I respect Aaron and AVGN, and I am not trying to insult or belittle either of them. They are entitled to their opinions, and I can even see why they would think what they do. Every game has one element so important to the game its absence would make it less impactful and almost ruin it in a way. Resident Evil 2 has Mr. X, Mario 64 has Peach's Castle, and of course Majora's Mask has the moon. In my opinion, the concept of a game with a time limit and an impending doom is fucking awesome. And this concept is what definitely creates the atmosphere of this game. The uneasy feeling where the clock is ticking and you need to move fast. Plenty of other games have done something similar to this, Pathologic being probably the best example of a game where time is not on your side, and I fucking adore that game, and you should play it because it's good. That said, Pathologic is a game requiring patience due to its frustrating way of psychologically torturing the player. Majora's Mask does something similar, but on a much smaller scale. Believe me, Pathologic is a lot more frustrating. Majora's Mask's time mechanic is honestly one of the most interesting things about it, since it creates a level of strategy to how you play the game. From the second you pop it in to the second you turn back time once more and get ready to turn it off, you have to think about every single decision you make, and it makes this easily the most complex Zelda game in the entire series. What do I mean by complex? Well, a good example and a great starting place would be the saving. Something that has earned this game both the critique and praise of many figures across the internet. Majora's Mask's saving system is just a little bit annoying, and if you're playing it on an emulator, I highly recommend you use save states instead of the regular saves of the game. That's how I played it upon my various replays for this video. I say this because Majora's Mask doesn't really save like a normal game, and the way that it's explained to the player is a tad misleading. You save two ways: awaken a bird statue or turn back time. Now keep in mind I said awakening a bird statue, I did not say using a bird statue. And what I mean is that these bird statues are only useful to you one time each, and then they become only useful for traversing the world. Many players will save at the bird statue more than once and then wonder why they lost their progress. They also try to explain this to the player, but don't explain it well, because they just use vague wording, and then when you pop it in again, you get fucked over. This is especially the case if you're like me and play long sessions. This game only really truly saves when you turn back time. So you would just turn back time anytime you wanted to save, right? Well, you lose all the items you had, and you also lose progress in all the quests you were doing, any dungeon-related shenanigans, most of the statuses the player might have, they're all gone. Things like the powder keg permission, how much health you have, the ability to collect all your items, your masks and other obvious stuff, all of that stays, but most of the time everything reverts back to 0 to match where Link was status-wise when he was on the first day. I think the issue with this saving technique only really applies to burnouts and dungeon progress. What this means is you have to keep playing the game until you get to a point where you can turn back time. You should only do this when you run into a bird statue, so you can use the Song of Soaring to get to the dungeon and don't lose your progress. You should only do this when you finish a side quest or two that gives you good upgrades and you're finally at a point where you can just turn back time and turn it off. This is all well and good, but what if you haven't even made it to a bird statue yet and you want to stop playing? Or even worse, what if you're in a dungeon and you're stuck and you need a break? The dungeons in this game are mentally taxing and take a lot of time and effort to get through, so the ability to save is extremely important for scenarios like this. Or at the very least, it shouldn't mess with your progress in a dungeon. AVGN made a good point in regards to when it was close to the time for the moon to come crashing down, and he obviously did not have enough time to get it done and beat the boss all in such a short amount of time, causing him to have to start over and lose his dungeon progress. Now, there is the ability to get an SD card and use it to save, but that's fucking it, and I shouldn't have to buy an SD card just to save properly in my fucking game. But I do like this, and what I like about it is that it gives the player a bit of strategy to how they approach the game's saving mechanics. You can only use each bird statue one time, and this one time is something you have to plan. When you get to the bird statue, you don't want to waste your one time. You want to use it when you have a lot better of a chance to do so. Lots of people also pause the game and let it sit overnight, hoping they don't have a power outage too. Which can work, I guess. But I respect that this game asks you to give it the time and patience required for it. You can't just save whenever you want. You play this game and you're signing up for a long session. This is one of many things making the game as stressful as the development process probably felt. Much like the Mask of Majora, you put this game in and it clutches you without giving you breathing room. It takes a lot of dedication and patience, and it's one of the things I admittedly admire about it. But again, I wouldn't blame anyone for using an emulated version and just using save states. One of the more infuriating parts of the game that many people may still take issue with, especially if they weren't a fan of Ocarina of Time, is the waiting. Like I said, it already takes enough patience with the saving mechanic, but given a lot of the game is based on timing and waiting, this can make the player even more frustrated if they don't have the patience to play this game. And that is fine. Ocarina of Time's linear combat felt like a lot of the game was based more on patience than Link to the Past. Link to the Past was short and to the point, and henceforth gave the player something to do constantly. Ocarina of Time was a lot more cinematic, and as a result, a lot more patience was involved if you were used to those kinds of retro games. I feel like I didn't make it clear in the Ocarina of Time video. I don't think waiting is a huge problem, and this was a huge issue I had with Egoraptor's whining about things like the chest opening animations and the dialogue. It came off like an angry, impatient child who was whining because he wasn't getting what he wanted right this instant. Or, more accurately,
you've had nature explained to you and you're bored with it, you've had the living body explained to you and you're bored with it, you've had the universe explained to you and you're bored with it. So now you just want cheap frills and like plenty of them, and it don't matter how tawdry or vacuous they are, as long as it's new, as long as it's new, as long as it flashes and fucking bleeps in 40 fucking different colours.
Not to say that he's not entitled to his opinion or anything, I just don't really think he expressed himself very reasonably. I do think Ocarina does tend to rely on it too much, and this makes the game seem a tad uninspired and predictable, but the waiting itself is not the problem, especially since the player had options to counteract the waiting, and most of the enemies had multiple options to kill them and weren't exclusively just waiting. It just kind of seems more like he relied on the waiting strategy every time he fought an enemy without thinking about experimenting and just sort of whined about how much waiting he had to do. And that's not to say that there's no waiting in the game. There's plenty and almost a tad too much, but for Wolfos and Lizalfos and even Stalfos, it's not 100% the case. It's more infuriating because he also brings up turn-based RPGs and says they don't take any skill by completely ignoring the fact that they are entirely based around strategy and deciding what you think is the next best move to use, like a game of chess, hence why it's called a fucking turn-based RPG. Waiting is a vague word though, and even though I think there was a tad too much of it in Ocarina of Time, my issue was more so with how the game felt like it wasn't really doing anything with its waiting, which I thought felt unique. Majora's Mask has just as much, if not even more, waiting than Ocarina of Time, but I felt like the waiting was handled in a much more unique way. Granted, it does do many things that are arguably just as, if not maybe even more uninspired than Ocarina of Time. One of the biggest and probably most annoying parts of the waiting of Majora's Mask is most definitely the bank teller. Every time you talk to him, he has to go through this annoying, obnoxious, stupid bit where he recognizes you and then tells you how much you have and all this stupid shit. I just want to access my account. And when you accidentally put in the wrong amount or push the wrong thing, you have to do it all over again. Now, some could say a better example is the fact that you keep running past this spot and have to be forced to sit through the shitty cutscene every time you pass, no matter how many times you've seen it. And yeah, that might be a better example, especially since it does what Ocarina does and takes control away from the player for something they probably didn't even fucking intend to interact with or care about. This makes the game very annoying. Especially since it resets every instance you go back in time, which is a lot. Maybe another good example is this long and drawn out puzzle towards the end of the game just before Stone Tower Temple, where you have to push these buttons down and keep them down by playing this song to create statues of your various forms, including your original. What the fuck is this? What is this? I don't like looking at it! It isn't even that it's hard or anything, although it is confusing which order you're supposed to have these pressed down in. I don't mind this aspect. In fact, I thought it was the most interesting part about this segment. My problem is just when you end up sitting through the same goddamn animation of you playing the same song again and again until you finally make it to the top. It's long, it's drawn out, and it's extremely unnecessary given we already had the buildup of Egos du Ikana and therefore don't fucking need this. But to top it off, they leave you these buttons which let you go back. This inclusion makes absolutely no sense given the player's ability to warp here. There's also the fucking vague Goron Elder and Baby quest since the player is at risk for spending a lot of time waiting because they sit there not actually knowing what they're supposed to do. Despite these examples though, I feel like the bank teller is the best example of this issue, simply because you're going to be talking to him a lot in this game, and you run into this issue every single time you do. It wouldn't be near as hair-pulling if he just left it at asking you whether you want to withdraw or deposit, and if so, how much. But I think putting those things aside, the waiting is a benefit to Majora's Mask when it applies to the time mechanic. In the game, if you go out of your way to get it, you can get the Bomber's Notebook. I got this thing by complete accident, too. That's the funny part. Like, I forgot I was regular Link upon leaving the Bomber's hideout because I thought you had to be Deku Link every time, and they just kind of give me the Bomber's Notebook. So take from my little experience there what you will. There are things the game can document once you get the Bomber's Notebook, each of which happen at specific times. Things change depending on specific times, like how easy a race is, or the path to finding a certain thing, or how someone will act during a certain time. So while the dialogue is an example of the player having to wait for something monotonous, things like this feel more interesting in a way Ocarina of Time did not, except for maybe when you got the Bigoron sword. Although if you had the Sun Song, then the excitement of killing time for it was just gone. Majora's Mask is a 3D Zelda game, and it's a sequel to the first 3D Zelda game in the entire series. Previously, their work was kinda cut out for them. You had an overhead view of everything and a clear idea of where your character was. You could see where everything is and what to do almost perfectly, but as I said in the Ocarina video, that luxury is gone. Now you only have bits and pieces of the room which are given to you instead of a direct layout of what the room contains. There are maps which tell you what the room looks like, but these serve to tell the player more or less what they can and can't interact with as opposed to what's in the room and how the room works and why you even need to be in here and so forth. It does tell you where treasure chests, guards, and bosses might be, but that's honestly about it. So this implements the importance of Z-targeting, which allows the player to focus on something specific that they can interact with, be it an enemy, person, specific item, or something Tattle thinks you should examine. The issue many people who watched the Ocarina of Time sequelitis complain about with this thing is how the game separates exploration from combat and makes them two separate modes. Usually this is to praise Link to the past for managing to combine the two modes as something you alternated between frequently, but it doesn't matter because you can still do both in the same game. They're just not simultaneous. There's not an objective need for them to be simultaneous, and it's not a guarantee for good game design. The game can still be good if you're still able to explore and fight. What works for an older Zelda game is not really going to work for a newer one. That's fine, hence why we need Z-targeting, so you're not spending all your time in first-person arrow mode without any idea of how you're going to hit the enemy, or hearing the enemy music but having no idea of where your enemy went. Try playing this game without Z-targeting a single time, and you'll see exactly what I mean. One thing I prefer in the 3D Zelda games is the automated platforming, which has earned the game comparison to Assassin's Creed by many that I've shown it to. It's satisfying knowing that he'll jump off without having to even bother pushing any sort of jump button. Automated jumping is something which can take the player a bit off guard if they never played Ocarina of Time, so the beginning chase segment allows the player to get used to it. This makes a game like the Torch game in the Great Bay a tad stupid because at this point the player has already grasped it and they give you way too much time to complete this task. It's just basically a free piece of heart. To be honest, the platforming is even funnier, because now Link does flips and tricks and shit while he jumps. I think they just included it to spice up what was one of the least interesting things about Ocarina of Time, but I don't think it really did much. There are also ways to make traversing the world of Majora's Mask a lot faster, which is an urge present in just about every Zelda game. The ideal form is to use the bunny hood, which makes Link's walking animation super speedy. And I prefer to use this thing over things like Epona since she can't go everywhere. It's also better than the Goron rolling since it takes a lot of magic. Things like the bird statues and so forth are an absolute godsend, because without them I would have to go through so much stupid bullshit all over again just to get to this dungeon area. The real meat of the game is the combat, which parallels a lot with what was present in Ocarina. You can use B to attack and R to defend. When neutral, your attacks are horizontal, but when targeting, your attacks become vertical. Moving forward while targeting and pressing B while targeting will perform a stab. You can also target and press A to perform a jump attack, which does twice the damage of a regular attack. Most of the fights have you sort of alternating between these various specific moves that you can perform. And the damage, of course, varies depending on the sword you have, which can get as powerful as performing 8 damage as opposed to usual 1. That said, the Z-targeting makes any potential combat in the neutral mode almost completely useless, since more of the fights in this game are in Z-targeting form. This is why the mirror shield is probably the best invention in the entire game. It gives a use to your shield other than defense during a fight. The light puzzles are actually some of my favorite things about the game, but it's also fun fighting certain enemies and deflecting their attacks right back at them. Keep a pin in that. It's going to be very important later. For now, I want to talk about the combat. For the most part, it's pretty cut and dry, not to mention easy to master. It flows rather nicely and your attacks only take under a second to perform. When you make a decision in battle, your decision is instant, which is very important for a Zelda game. Many different enemies in Majora's Mask take entirely different approaches to fight. You don't spend the game fighting every enemy with the same strategy. They all take multiple methods readily open for the player to choose from. You have opponents like the Skulltulas or Garo, which take the usual waiting gimmick in which you just sort of time your attacks to hit at the right time when they're vulnerable. However, the Skulltula can only be accurately killed with a far-ranged weapon as opposed to close range, since he'll spin if you use your sword. Garo as well is less of you waiting for the weak point and more so waiting for him to hit you with an attack you can block to knock him down. If there were a waiting type enemy that I had to complain about, it's probably clams. You have these very obnoxious segments in which you have to kill clams in small little sections of the room in a tight closed off space. Waiting makes these fights annoying as is, but the worst part is how small the hitbox of their weak point is, or how easy it is to miss it. This combat isn't all over the game, however, as P-Hats and Redeads are constantly vulnerable. Redeads and Gibdos are actually an interesting enemy in the game, purely for the fact that their combat is based on inciting fear into the player. The horrifying scream, the control being taken away from you for a few moments. These enemies are fucking horrifying, which is the point, they're meant to be. I just wish they had the time to allow you to fight them in other forms, since you're basically made invulnerable as a Deku or Goron. It kinda makes the game feel unfinished in certain parts. My favorite enemy of this type is the Iron Knuckle, whose design is easily some of the most genius in the entire game. He's constantly vulnerable yet hard to reach because of his massive damage, giving the player an incentive to keep their distance. But he slowly gets faster over the course of the fight, making him harder and scarier the further you get in, having this increasing intensity as the fight takes its course. There's this one point where you fight him and the room is limited and small, giving you less space to avoid his large hitboxes and making the fight a lot more stressful, and I like this. He's my favorite enemy in probably any Zelda game, to be perfectly honest. Not all enemies are confined to just one strategy or the other, as Dodongos take multiple different strategies to kill. You can use bombs, which they will swallow, and I find that pretty interesting as well as hilarious. It's unfortunately difficult to time, yet a much more interesting way to kill them than the normal slow method of slashing their tail. Killing them with a horse is also fucking hilarious because you just drag them forward without stopping. The enemies like the beetles and dragonfly things in Swamp Palace are both enemies which can be killed either as a Deku Scrub or human. You utilize various strategies simultaneously for each enemy as you make it through the swamp. These sort of mix-ups of priority are easily one of the things Majora's Mask does the absolute best, and they're all over the game. Enemies like Takuris are a threat for an entirely separate reason than most enemies, for example. They steal your precious valuables and make the player have to go back to Clocktown and rebuy everything they lost. And that's a far more stressful problem than just simply being killed, since the items he takes are absolutely important to playing the game. Another example would be sneaking into the Deku Palace, which is a very interesting concept utilizing the Deku Flower mechanic. You are overwhelmed by these Deku Scrubs who fire at you relentlessly, and the threat comes less from death and more from falling and needing to start all over again. Defeating one earns you more Deku Flowers, which allows you to traverse the area better. There's also the Skullkita, which is a barrage of obstacles as you chase what is otherwise a large target and have to be stopped in frequent intervals. You have to alternate between shooting him to delay him a bit and killing his lackeys so that you can catch up to him, which can be a tad overwhelming. Fighting him leaves many mix-ups as he jumps on top of you, and you don't have much room to avoid him. This sort of difficulty is easily something that can turn the player off if they aren't really feeling it, since they don't guarantee your death per se, but they do make the game more annoyingly tedious if you fail. It makes failure feel harsh, and as you keep failing again and again at these things, it can feel so much better when you hit victory. Things like the Skullkita fight, as well as this mini-boss with a bunch of bats, are what make Majora's Mask one of the most impressive step-ups for the Nintendo 64, since this was not possible to fit into Ocarina of Time without causing lag. This is why the expansion pack was so necessary, and it's a good inclusion since it gave us a pretty high-quality game. The combat is something the player learns as they go through it, but just in case the player isn't really picking up how to fight quite yet, there's a sword trainer you can go to as a human who will teach you the ins and outs of combat. This opens up an avenue for the player to refresh them on how the game works given to the player early on. There's actually an expert course with this swordsman giving the player more life if they master the combat. It's an area which teaches the player how to play the game, but it isn't shoved in their face. It's simply made available to the player of their own volition to keep them from being lost. I think the controls work just fine for the most part, but I can also see why people would think maybe they're a tad clunky. Most of the time, things like the warp screens don't have a very accurate direction of where your cursor is going to go, making it a tad frustrating if you're going to get to one place and it refuses to go where you need it to. Controlling Link as well can be a tad clunky because they haven't really perfected the feel of a 3D game just yet. Grappling onto items isn't exactly easy. Neither is shooting something that you're not targeting because you have a very vague idea of what it is you're going to hit. Same for the vague idea of where your Deku nuts are going to land when you're a Deku scrub, or where your boomerangs are going to go as a Zora. Sometimes the water doesn't freeze, sometimes I shoot through the fire to hit the lantern, but it doesn't hit anything. It's annoying, and while it doesn't necessarily make the game broken, I can see why it would frustrate people, but the combat totally makes up for that in my opinion. The game begins in a large open room with a lot of wideness to get the general idea of the controls and grass, which allows you to utilize your weaponry and get the hang of it too. The rooms get even wider when you turn into a Deku scrub and practice your abilities to fly around. It's a miniature obstacle course with no real genuine difficulty to it, and it almost feels a little like a room that developers would make when testing the mechanics of the game and perfecting them as opposed to an actual first beginning level. There's a little something for every mechanic, from the flying to the jumping to the Z-targeting on his dead body. Our dead friend there had a final purpose being to teach the player how to play the game. Clocktown is one of the most charming home areas in any game that I've ever played. It's a simple playground which opens a wider landscape to practice the controls, but it makes you feel helpless at the same time. This feeling is exactly what Link is going through in this Deku form, and it's precisely what makes the beginning limitation so important. They give you a bit of power, a bit of a generally normal feeling for the game before thrusting you downward and telling you to work so you can get your human form back. And this is the game's way of making you feel like you've lost everything just like Link did. The Deku mask that you get at the beginning of the game is a rather simplistic yet fun little transformation. As you go through the game, this form actually feels a lot more fun to use. He's very small and frail, not to mention weak to elements like fire, which will one-shot you immediately, but you are able to stun various opponents in this form. You can also make up for the weightlessness and weak, frail susceptibility to damage by being a lot faster and harder to hit. Things like the spinning and the Deku flower segments are very charming and are honestly so goddamn fun. Your combat is primarily far-ranged, making him the best choice against certain enemies like Skulltulas. Despite your helplessness in this form at the very start, it does you quite a bit of good as you get further due to the abilities which are specifically unique to this form. I like the balance at the start. Things like the dog or the guards make the player feel limited as Link feels in his form, but it also tells the player what they are and aren't allowed to do. Rather than just shutting you down at the start completely, they give you a wide array of things that you're also allowed to do, which you find by exploring Clocktown. Things like going around the town searching for the Great Fairy's final piece, or the mini-game with the bombers, are opportunities for the player to get the general layout of the town by looking, and this gets the player much more comfortable with this area, especially since it's going to be a place where they return to quite often. So it's very important these segments are included as much as many people may not care for them. The Deku Scrub spot I talked about earlier is something that can probably kill the flow of exploration when it comes to these segments, but it is important since it serves as the first real introduction to the game's trading mechanic, and it's rather straightforward. You are given the option to pause and equip any item needed for the trading sequence. You're given an indication there's something you need for this character, and when you do have it, you'll know exactly who it goes to with the little subtle hints the character gives you. This can be a bit of a frustrating thing, however, like in later segments, such as when you run into the old witch sister and accidentally drink the potion instead of fucking god damn. Once you finally become a human and get out into a field full of enemies, your tasks are still laid out for you. You can choose to go to the swamp, or you can choose to do in Clocktown what was not available to you as a Deku Scrub. Hell, you had this before you even got to Clocktown with the Flower Room, where the player is given two choices. Either go get this chest, or just keep going this way, in an attempt to teach the player to explore. Your first real enemy is the Skulltula, and it's an enemy you can either choose to learn the mechanics of, or run around and just ignore. It's up to the player how they want to go about doing it. I really like moments like the obstacle course in the Pirate's Fortress. You have this puzzle based on block pushing and memorization, forcing you to pay attention to your surroundings. You have these spikes on the floor and a water geyser that sends the player outside, giving you incentive to control your swimming in a limited space. And I love moments like hitting the crystal switch to see what it does before orienting my position in preparation for it as well. But the puzzle is still flawed due to the limitations of 3D and not being able to see everything all at once. The large spikes at the very top can knock the player over for just simply not knowing they're even there. The game constantly gives the player subtle indications of what their goal is, like the cutscene that establishes our objective with a B before even going into the context of what it is we are doing here or what we even need to do in this fortress. No matter what order you might find the Zora eggs in, there is always a consistent flow to it, urging the player to know exactly where to go to find the next one due to the layout of the hideout. No matter what order you find it in, it leads into the next one seamlessly. There's these large patterns to the pirates and sneaking around them, and if you don't have the invisibility mask, it's important to find the gaps in their sight and learn how long it takes for them to wake up when knocked out, making things like the required picture of one a challenging task. But this again correlates with the idea of choice and freedom. It's not mandatory at all, but it does make the game easier, which, again, is entirely up to you. Even towards the end of the game, you're given two choices. You can either go fight Skull Kid, or you can finish your collecting and keep exploring the world of the game. And they never tell you flat out you have to go fight him now. Majora's Mask's dungeons are some of the best in probably the entire series, and this is also one of the Zelda games where every single dungeon tops the one preceding it. The first dungeon is the Woodfall Temple, which is the worst dungeon in the game, but I still definitely had a blast playing through it. I want to address that there are various fairies laid out throughout the dungeon. The Great Fairy rewards you after every single dungeon, and they serve to make the game much less of a hassle. But what's awesome about that is that collecting the fairies throughout each dungeon is actually really fun in and of itself. They are little things you find by exploring the dungeon and learning it inside and out. They also heal you, which is a reward as well, especially if you need the health. The only critique I have of these fairies is that their placement can sometimes lead the player to an ironic sense of disappointment. Majora's Mask's structure as a game is entirely based around the dungeons. You have the dungeons, the content between the dungeons, which is optional and up to the player, and then the final boss. In these dungeons, you have the moment you get the dungeon map, and then the moment you get the compass, the moment you get the dungeon item, and then the boss. Between all of this, however, are various keys that you will find throughout the dungeon to access different doors and find different rooms. Fairies, albeit unintentionally, serve as a way of disrupting this format. They don't get you any further into the dungeon, and often it makes the player feel as if they just wasted time. But despite that, their inclusion makes it easier for me to learn the dungeon inside and out. This is actually why the Gold Scatula dungeons are some of the most genius in the game, and why Gold Scatulas were such a good concept in Ocarina of Time. Rather than going through a series of puzzles or trying to worry about where you might have missed a key or what door needs to be unlocked and whatnot, you spend it exclusively paying attention to your surroundings to find what might be hiding in certain areas. It gives this incentive now to actually look around in the dungeon and spend time in first-person mode trying to see what you missed, especially since they don't show up in the map. It's like a treasure hunt. Woodfall actually doesn't get enough attention for its level design, but that's because of how much it gets outshined by the other dungeons, which are way smarter. However, that doesn't mean that the ideas presented themselves are not interesting. You have all of this poison in all these bodies of water. You also have these monsters that will eat up human Link and spit him out. So with these two things, it comes off like you're supposed to play through it exclusively as Deku Link. But then you have segments like the fire torches or the cobwebs, which make it obvious that the dungeon requires you to alternate between both forms frequently, giving a use to both forms in a creative way. Not only that, but lighting the first torch gives you the choice of getting the compass or just deciding to keep going through the dungeon as normal. You have this room that's very dark, and then you're bombarded with these shadow enemies, and you have to light all of the torches in the room before your stick or any of the already lit torches go out. Puzzles like this are interesting and give a unique value to items like sticks. You get a similar sense of urgency to the final room. You have to hit the switch and the fire will go out, but the time is limited, and you can only get to the flower on it as a Deku Scrub, meaning you have to be swift before the fire comes back. Many of the puzzles in this dungeon can only really be solved by just shooting an arrow at something that the usual bubble ability wouldn't work with. You have this one where you have to shoot arrows through fire to light a torch across the room, which will lift up the flower in the middle of said room. Each of the dungeons are framed in such a way so that the goal is made extensively clear, and the player must figure out how to reach that goal. And in this case, the flower is right there for you to see. You couldn't miss it. Dinolfo is one of the two mini-bosses of this dungeon. In a normal battle with him, his vulnerability is only present when he's active as opposed to doing nothing. It gives you an incentive to study his movement and pay close attention. But he can also be fought as a Deku, with bombs and with Deku Nuts. Also, if you time it just right, you can attack him on the first frame that he enters his fire-breathing animation. The second mini-boss is Gecko and Snapper. I feel like his behavior is totally inappropriate. I had a pun for this, but I forgot. I know how to make him croak. Don't worry. He looks happy. Might be because he eats whatever bugs him. I find this very riveting. I'm glad I was told how to beat him. I wonder what his nationality is. He looks German and a tad Polish. I'll never forgive him. I wonder what music he likes. Probably hip-hop. I'm gonna have to make this boss Pepe. Okay, that one was actually fucking rancid. Jesus Christ, I'm sorry. Snappers were opponents the player was introduced to earlier. They're opponents that require the player to both explore the environment and perform combat simultaneously. This was how a lot of the enemies in A Link to the Past worked. You have to look out for flowers, which can be used to flip him over with a well-timed shot. The player is not just confined to that, however, as bombs are equally viable an option. Generally speaking, it's not a particularly difficult dungeon, and it doesn't really bring much out of the player. But despite that, as a first dungeon, it's straightforward and introduces the player to the elements that are going to be presented throughout the game. It also shows the player how dungeons in this game work and introduces concepts that stay prevalent as you play. The real highlight of Woodfall is Odolwa. He's a giant tiki monster with a sword and a shield. I like that you're able to approach him multiple different ways. He's only vulnerable when he's around. You have to study him, and act when necessary in those small little windows of opportunity. For example, you can't just block and stab and Z-target all simultaneously. When you shield stab as well, you can't move if you're not Z-targeting. So this difficulty creates a sense of timing and balance, in that you have to know when to Z-target, when to stop, and when to go back to Z-targeting. You can also fight him with this newly acquired bow. Attack him and keep your distance, which is helpful, especially since his giant sword is a consistent hitbox, meaning that just touching it in and of itself will hurt you, whether he swings it or not. I'm assuming this is generally how he's meant to be fought, but there are actually plenty of other strategies readily available to the player. For example, you can utilize the environment and surroundings by using bombs, which can distract the summoned minions that come later in the fight. Alternatively, you can also use your Deku form, which is invincible against the various summoned bugs, but can't attack him directly, causing you to need to swap between the two frequently. The Deku Flower unfortunately offers nothing to the player that makes the gameplay unique, since you can just hit him with Deku Nuts on land in a much easier fashion as a human. There's also plants that yield arrows in case the player has run out. While you fight him, you're meant to focus on him, but also on your surroundings, which can be a bit overwhelming with his hectic, unpredictable movements, each of which could lead to any number of attacks in his arsenal. My favorite attack from him is the Circle of Fire, which entraps the player and gives them less space to dodge his attacks or attack him. He's not brutally hard or anything, but he is definitely a highlight that I think deserves more praise. The second transformation mask you get is the Goron mask, and it's actually my favorite to use of the three. It's large and bulky and moves rather slow. On top of that, you're also weak to huge bodies of water, and you have no ranged abilities, making you useless for points where those are necessary. He's also too heavy and cannot jump, which can often lead to very tedious bits where you don't have much land to reside on. The worst part, for sure, is definitely his attacks. Yes, rolling into enemies as a giant spiked ball is fucking awesome as hell, but the dog shit hitboxes on things like the follow-ups to the Goron punch are really pointless. While the initial attack might do the player some use, the following ones are absolutely worthless and can't hit shit. You're really better off just doing a Goron pound, which has a bigger hitbox and can often guarantee kills. I will say though, I absolutely love the rolling ability. It's smooth, and the controls can be really satisfying once you get the hang of them, but that's not always going to be the case. The fast-paced rolls are already fun as is, however, when you run into something you aren't just completely knocked off the edge, unless it's off of a treasure chest or some slanted wall. Ramming head-on into a wall just has him stop in his tracks immediately, which can be useful for adjusting. In fact, if you want to stop rolling, there is no screeching halt. You just stop, and I honestly really like that. It's a bit jarring if you are used to these kinds of physics, but it is a little bit more convenient. The Snowhead Temple is a lot more complicated than the one preceding it. If the block here is any indicator, it's that you're going to end up being a Goron for a good portion of this temple. This isn't the case through the whole dungeon, however. You have sections of the temple like this platformer bit where you have to shoot the ice and climb up. It's important to keep moving, otherwise the smaller stalactites will fall on top of you, creating an intense feeling of urgency for one thing. But on top of that, it shows the player that they need to alternate between your Goron form and your human form frequently through this dungeon. There's this part where you're at huge risk for falling, and when you do, you have Deku Flowers to help send you back up, giving an odd use to the Deku form as well. There's this part with a large bridge that you can roll across that has a Freezar blowing at you, as a sort of method of teaching the player to train their timing and get it just right. Timing ends up being important in this dungeon, like the room in which you have to alternate between this green switch and this yellow switch to have both the doors open and your body on the upper levels. The enemies that bombard you in the lower levels as well are just the cherry on top. There's an ice puzzle, which I felt was the perfect use of 3D perception. It makes what would have already been challenging even harder, as you have to use perspective to accurately try to figure out where this ice block goes and what bumps you can use to get it where you need. It's like the Ocarina of Time puzzle on a bit of a smaller scale. It becomes clear that the room in the center with the giant tower is the main goal of this dungeon, and the player is beckoned to get the floor of this giant tower leveled, almost without even knowing why they have to, until they see that the boss door is blocked by it. But what I love most about this dungeon is the moment in which you get the fire arrows. Up until this point, you were constantly being bombarded with these obnoxious ice walls and giant ice rocks and so on, but you couldn't do anything about them. Finding the fire arrows actually makes you feel very powerful, because it allows you to go back and get them out of the way. It's kind of like fighting the two Dynalphos, who in this dungeon are now presented as just regular enemies. It really shows how far you've come and makes you feel rather powerful. Wizrobe is a boss fight that I love, but I also think is a tad overused in this game. You fight him about 5 or 6 times the entire game, and he only gets just a little bit stronger every time, but not much. His gimmick is that he has these various platforms spread around the room, and he alternates between them. It's meant to leave the player constantly looking around and staying on their toes, which is important because, and even if you avoid it, the hitbox expands and you'll probably still end up getting hit. On top of that, it's very difficult to recuperate and get back up against him. It can be annoyingly brutal if you're not careful. I also love how he's one of those boss fights that require the player to actually move. Goma had this huge boss room, but you never really had to leave this little section right here, and that usually seemed to be the case with a lot of the Ocarina bosses. Despite my praise, he becomes pretty boring if you have the map and compass, which just spell out exactly where he is, making him less difficult and more of a chore. I get that this is a reward for exploring and getting to know the dungeon in and out, but it's also a joke, and I would rather just fight him with the map turned off. He does spice it up in the Stone Tower Temple with the lava raining down on top of you, but other than that, I feel like you fight him too many times in this game, especially if you're doing the 100% run. With that said, I really love the goat boss fight, and think it is one of the greatest boss fights probably ever. It should be noted there is a lazy way of fighting him at the doorway, and it's the safer method for sure, but it's also long and tedious. Also, when he starts dropping bombs, you are at a huge risk, rendering the whole reason you went with this strategy completely pointless. It's also boring and a horrible way to fight him, so don't be a pussy. I love this goddamn boss fight. It's extremely fast-paced and utilizes the mechanics of the Goron roll, the best thing to ever exist in a Zelda game, to its fullest potential. You spend this fight constantly paying attention to the rocks and bombs he drops, and if you're not careful, it gets very ugly. You've got that on top of his energy beams, which will punish the player for getting too greedy and forcing them to pay close attention to his movements. But the real icing on the cake is the stalagmites, the thingies that fall from the ceiling. They may not hurt you, but they do interrupt the flow of the fight and cause you to fall behind, which is something you don't want to happen because he will punish you with lightning beams that are unforgivably brutal and hard to avoid. The environment isn't completely against you, however, as you have these various energy jars and large ramps that allow you to stun him by landing on his back. Goat is probably my favorite boss battle in the entire game because of his pure, raw intensity and insanity, and I love fighting him so goddamn much that sometimes I would just go back and fight him all over again multiple times. The final mandatory transformation mask you get is the Majora Mask, which is modeled after Adult Link from Ocarina of Time. He's tall and his movement is a lot quicker than that of the Goron form. His main form of attack is these far-ranged boomerang abilities, which work a lot like the boomerang in the previous installment. It requires an attention to things like depth perception, but using them leaves you wide open for attacks. At least they would if there wasn't an exploit you could use to pull out more than two by taking off the mask. Despite that, the close-ranged combat is very awkward with extremely small hitboxes, making the boomerangs the preferred method of fighting. Closed-ranged combat only becomes preferable underwater, in which you have an ability to zap opponents, with the only downside being that it eats up energy really fast. You're also weak to things like fire, which will one-shot you if you come into direct contact with it. I think the definite highlight of the Zora form isn't so much the combat as it is the swimming, which controls super smoothly. It's extremely responsive, and once you get used to the somewhat average speed of it and let go of that urge to zip through the waters, you find it can actually be pretty fucking fun to control. This is, of course, without mentioning things like the fact that you can dive above the water if you build up speed and approach it at an angle. You can also sink to the bottom, similar to the iron boots from Ocarina of Time, except unlike those iron boots, you can still pretty much control like normal, minus the permission to use your items. The Great Bay Temple is a very good dungeon, although I could definitely see people hating on it given their hatred of the Water Temple. It actually begins with you in this somewhat large room with these 4 torches that remain unlit. The player is already off the bat given the choice to either ignore them or light them to see what they do, which gives you a fairy. The main room pretty much tells you what to do without really telling you what to do. It's subtly reinforced by the 2 pipes with water coming out on one end but not the other. You run into this switch that you have to push, see that it affects the nearby water, and the goal already becomes extensively clear. It's kind of like the giant waterway with a current that is impossible to fight. With some of these inaccessible gaps in the wall, the player knows full well that they must switch the current around, and the fun comes from figuring out how. The player is incentivized to use the assets already available to them. You also see how it comes full circle with these red and green pipes in the wall and how the active one had a sort of glimmer to it while the regular ones did not. So the player is beckoned to follow where these pipes lead so they can get to the root of the issue. All of this is clear as day, but the game never feels a need to stop the player in their tracks and spell this out for them. I should make it clear I don't hate it when games spell something out for you. And in the case of Majora, that is the case at least 100 times over with Tattle. What I prefer is when a game can give you hints in a way that doesn't remove control from the player against their will. I would rather have the option to get a hint than have the hint forced onto me without my say in the matter. I understand that players who aren't as good at adapting will get frustrated if a game doesn't offer them some level of help to figure it out. And I'm all for games that offer the best interest for everyone, but when I'm stopped in my tracks out of the blue for something that I could probably figure out on my own, I tend to lose interest. Here you have things like the Red Geyser, where you're not told outright how to get over there. You think, what the fuck, dude? Am I just supposed to grow wings and get over there somehow? You use the first person mode to look around it and see if there's a hookshot spot right up there on the ceiling, and congratulations, you figured it out completely on your own. You're smart boy. Same for the point where you see a bomb chew rat over here, and upon killing it, discover that there's another treasure chest right there. My favorite example would also be these 2 fairy alcoves that you can find, which were ones I had never found the many times I played this game until I did a 100% run for this video, and you just find it by having a very good eye. Things like that are just so fucking cool. Like, especially when you discover something new about a game after having played it like 100 times for so long. That said, the variety offered in the Great Bay Temple is absolutely stellar. You have these long hallways of Deku Baba monsters, and they hang from the ceiling, but when knocked down... No! I love how they spiced it up, taking what used to be an extremely brain-dead easy enemy and turning it into something a lot more creepy. It's especially great since the player will probably underestimate them and be taken completely off guard by it. It should be noted that in Ocarina of Time they had an idea where you would get elemental arrows for each of the temples, but discovered that it was a pain in the ass to implement correctly and ended up scrapping it. Well, until they started using it here, of course. Obviously. You get the ice arrows, which I actually think are the most interesting arrows you get in the game. They freeze obstacles, but they also allow the player to create their own platforms as they traverse the water. This is actually really fucking cool. It's like Nintendo said, fine, you want platforming? Make it yourself then! They also have a limited staying time, but in my opinion, that adds another layer of intensity and urgency to the gameplay. There's a whole room with an upper level that requires proper angling and perspective, all in key with the timing of the ice platforms, and it's probably one of the most unique uses of this mechanic. You can also use it in this room with these seesaws that take a distribution of weight. You're supposed to freeze or unfreeze the waterways that push them a certain direction. The wart mini-boss of this temple is honestly pretty interesting. I mean, right from the get-go, you enter the room and it's empty, giving the player the incentive to look around until they get the shit scared out of them with his giant eye on the ceiling. I want to take note of AVGN's complaint about this boss, saying that it's tedious.
Many of the boss battles are repetitive and grueling, like this one where you have to kill all the eyeballs. Do you think there's enough eyeballs?
Well, that's not entirely true. Yes, the player probably is going to have the hookshot be the first thing that springs to mind upon fighting this mini-boss, but you can experiment. You have an entire arsenal of weapons at your fingertips and are not just limited to one strategy. How do you think I discovered that bubbles can be killed with light arrows and drop 50 rupees as a result? I did it by testing it out and experimenting with my items. So yes, the hookshot is probably a safer method to fight him, but you can use things like fire arrows, Deku nuts, and bombs, each of which detach an entire wave of bubbles that have the player staying on their toes and trying to avoid getting hit by them. This is made even more intense by his second phase, in which he viciously slides across the ground, and the player has to contend with both him and the remaining bubbles. That same sort of overwhelming intensity is implemented in the other mini-boss of the dungeon, Gecko and Mad Jelly. You're constantly paying attention to your surroundings, both when the jellies surround you and when you're at threat for being sucked up by it, especially when he lands, and if he grabs hold of you, it can get really annoying. You have the ability to let him fall on purpose and to get a good handle on targeting him, so you can use that opportunity to shoot him with the ice arrow. Seeing him smash into the ground and shatter is honestly just so goddamn satisfying. But in my opinion, I really love the actual boss fight of the temple, George. His name is George, we're just gonna call him George. The boss gets a lot of flack from a lot of people. I'm assuming because of JonTron including him in a list of horrible boss battles. Roll the clip.
Wealthy blacks also commit more crime than poor whites.
Wait, fuck. That's... Okay, hang on, that's not the right clip.
Honestly, can you tell me something? Why does every Zelda game have to have a water temple? And why do they always have to suck so much? Ocarina of Time's water temple? I'd rather drown. Twilight Princess's water temple? I'd rather drown. And oh god, the Great Bay Temple from Majora's Mask. I'd rather drown. Freaking oh my god, that's another video though.
What's unfortunate is that it's a video he didn't make, so these claims are ones that probably shouldn't be included in the list.
Georg is the boss of the Great Bay Temple, and he's a fish with an attitude that smells like fish. In theory, this boss battle isn't really that hard. In fact, one ancient Greek douchebag might have called it Ise Polioreos. All you've really got to do to defeat him is stun him and attack him. But Nintendo made sure that doing so would be like trying to reach a bag of chips while they were underwater and your head was a camera from the Bourne Identity movies. When you can manage to see Yorg, which is never by the way, your lock-on doesn't even work and your elbow boomerangs hit the floor or swoop right next to him, missing him completely. Look at this shit!
This is an odd statement, because he shows himself locking onto him. Remember what I said about how depth perception with the Zora form is very essential? You're not exactly confined to just using the Zora form, because you can also use the arrows to hit him, or you can go underwater and sink to the bottom and hit him that way if you're not a pussy. I don't recommend that strategy though, because your boomerangs kind of leave you vulnerable, and if they don't work, you're kind of fucked. Either they don't hit him at all, or they just bounce off of his armor. They're really only something that you can use situationally, and if the situation doesn't call for it, then you have to experiment and figure something else out.
Not to mention, if you screw up getting out of the water immediately after attacking him in the small window of time allotted, he'll come out of the shitty camera and eat your ass faster than you can say, fuck this game. Disclaimer, Majora's Mask is actually the best game ever.
And that's certainly a possibility, unless you swim around to the other side of the platform and get on it from there. When he rams into the platform, you don't want to be near the edges, so you have to keep in the center of it until you have a clear idea of where he is. George is unforgiving and brutal, but that's something I respect about fighting him. For example, in the four corners of the room, you have magic you can gather. If you waste all of your magic and have to go get some more, you have to work for it by swimming to the corner of the room and getting it. These are here to mentally torture the player and leave them no choice but to leave themselves at risk of being hurt if they run out of magic. It's like the game is fucking with you, and it feels so goddamn evil, but I absolutely love that little touch. It's harsh, so you have to play against his tactics in a way that's smart.
Let's just hope Skyward Sword has no water temple, huh?
The more work you put into 100%ing the game, the easier the game becomes. But that depends entirely on how much work into the game you want to put. It actually makes you feel powerful in a way, having worked to get to that point. You can get your hearts up to 20, and you can also get all the bottles, which each hold a fairy that will revive you if you die. And this is part of why exploring and getting to know the locals is so important. See, it's funny that Aaron said this.
And you just die because he does 1,000 health when he kills you, and then it sends you back to the beginning of the temple, and you gotta go through that whole flippy-floppy bullshit again. And then that's the door that leads to this fucking boss that kills you in 2 hits!
When he's the same guy who said this.
You think I can make that jump in my human form?
Into the fire?
Well, I would clear it first.
I don't think that's...
Oh, it's just for a heart piece. Who gives a shit?
If you keep dying, then it's your own fault. It's not the game's. In Ocarina of Time, I would say that the upgrades bugged me because the game was so easy that I didn't need them, but I realize now that this was not always going to be the case, and it was Majora that helped me realize how essential these upgrades are for players who may find the game a tad more troublesome. I think it's too easy? Well, then I should play a run where I 0% it and get none of the upgrades available to me. I beat it only with what I absolutely need. So the upgrades to Ocarina aren't that bad, and I get why they're here. What's easy for me will not be easy for you, because I'm better at games than you. So in my opinion, the upgrades are fine, except magic. That served no purpose. You barely use magic in Ocarina of Time. That's something that actually changes here, where you're gonna be using a lot of magic for like a lot of your abilities. One of the things that Zelda does a lot is give the player tiny, subtle indications of what they're meant to do. For example, in this room, you see nothing, but if you break the pots, you see magic, and then come to the realization that you need the lens of truth. You humor the game's little subtle indication, and you of course come to the realization that the wall in front of you is false. There's a heart piece that you can get by feeding these fish inside this lab, and it's funny because you wouldn't really think to do that unless you were just examining the room and seeing what's there. There's also this beaver racing minigame that you only find by seeing these hookshot pillars that lead to behind the waterfall. It's a whole minigame that you can find by just being aware of your surroundings. I love it because it is the perfect game for getting the player accustomed to the swimming mechanic, and since you have to go through it twice, If you want to 100% this game, it's an opportunity to learn and get comfortable with, maybe even potentially good at, the Zora swimming mechanics. What is this? Superman 64? Flying through hoops? Superman 64! Flying through hoops! Actually, it's way more well done than Superman 64. I will say, though, fighting the beavers back-to-back is probably one of the most monotonous and tedious parts of the game. I feel like maybe instead of you fighting both beavers back-to-back, they could, you know, have just made the heart piece be the reward for one, and then the bottle be the reward for the other, but anyways, it always kind of feels like the game is communicating to the player in a very subtle fashion. My favorite example of this is when you play the shooting minigame just before you enter the swamp. The game is a pretty difficult one if you haven't practiced your aim much, but my favorite thing about it is that there's this little patch of grass near the doorway that gives you a lot of money and serves as like an infinite source. This is intentional, as the developers probably expected people to not get this game down pat immediately, but it also feels like a bit of a fuck you, you're gonna be awful at this. It feels like I'm being laughed at, and that can probably feel shitty to some people. Despite that, most people get the quiver upgrade because they're bad with the bow, but it takes real skill at the bow to get these upgrades. So what this means is that Majora's Mask expects the player to work for it. And the real use this has is incentivizing the player to train up on something and get better at it. There's a point where you find food in a jar which gets you a heart piece, and you find it by using a ramp to practice rolling. It's a solution to a problem you encountered earlier, and you simply find the solution by getting better at the game. Things like the Scarecrow offer the game a sense of wonder, as that particular character is an opportunity for the game to utilize one of the most important mechanics in the 64 titles, and especially Majora, the songs that you can play. It allows freedom to explore your areas of your own volition, but it also allows the player to be creative and make their own song. All of these are opportunities paid to the player by just simply talking to the locals and exploring the way that the game intended. The issue that might arise from some of these things, and especially the Scarecrow, is that it corresponds to the time gimmick, which can make this whole thing just fucking stupid. You have to go back and teach him the Scarecrow song all over again every single time the cycle starts over. That's sort of the thing about it that I definitely get. Many things in this game are honestly bad in a way that they shouldn't be. The well is probably my least favorite part of the entire game. It was an attempt at an interesting riddle game, but it's fucking riddled because you enter it, and then if you don't have the proper items that are necessary, you have to leave and come back with every item that comes up because you have no fucking idea what asinine request the redeads are going to give you next. Nobody is going to think about stocking up on every single thing until it's full before they enter the well. That's not something the game hints towards. I like the brain teasers that it offers you, as well as the choices left open on what door you think you should go through next. I also think that the Wall Masters are a genius enemy, but I'll get to that in a different video because in this dungeon I hate them. I already hate going through this dungeon, and having to figure out where I was just makes it worse. I respect that this game is as brutal as it is, but points like this just fucking annoy me. Like, there's also this obnoxious sword upgrade, which was fucking annoying because it's only exclusive on the first day, and if you didn't get it the first day, then you have to go back through all of this tedious shit all over again, including the race. I loved the race. I thought it was a very fun minigame. But other people who probably didn't like the race aren't going to be particularly happy that they have to go back through it all over again just for a little sword upgrade. Doesn't seem worth it!
Why are we going so fucking fast, nigga?
We stopped though.
Yeah, what?
Things like the Romani Milk defending game are obnoxious because of how unbalanced they are. It's easy, but the punishment for a potential fuck-up is way too much. You do get a mask that will help you with this, but it's a lot of work to get that mask, and especially too much work just to make what was already an easy minigame a guaranteed win. This seems so out of place here, especially since the effort to get said mask is only something that you would do in a 100% run. The reward is totally worth it because you get a hug and she shoves your face in her tits. Epic swag 420 Reddit moment. There's this really stupid segment where you have to watch this Deku scrub fly into a hole, and if you get impatient and leave, you have to start completely over, and I don't know why that's here. I also don't really get the point of the Great Fairy Sword, as I feel it really could have been implemented sooner, but they had to keep up the theme of rewards for collecting fairies. It's pretty unfortunate, because this sword doesn't do you much good in the boss fight, and that was the last dungeon. So it kind of feels useless. You really don't get any time to use it unless you're using it on the final boss. But that's not even nearly as useless as the completely unnecessary boss run at the end. It's uninspired and just you fighting the same bosses you already fought, including the same guy you killed 5 times in a row, but they needed another heart piece in the game, so... Also, you have the Frog Quest, or the Gibdo Mask, and these are just a lot of effort for a little payoff. There's no point in fighting the Snowhead Temple boss all over again just for a piece of heart. Again, unless you're doing a 100% run, or you really think you need all of the hearts in the game because you're just that bad at it. And if that's the case, you know, I'm not gonna judge you. This game's hard. I mean, to be fair. To be fair! The pictograph is fucking stupid and obnoxious because if you don't have the stone mask, you are required to go back and forth from the guy with the seahorses to the guard's base because the picture has to be perfectly precise. Just fuck this. Fuck this! Fuck this! Especially since you can't take more than one picture. And this is required to beat the game. What the fuck? That said, none of that gets nearly as bad as my absolute least favorite part of the game, the powder keg. This thing is so fucking stupid right from the get-go, as you have to enter this place as a human and then turn back into a Goron when you get inside because you can't enter as a Goron, but you can't carry powder kegs as a human, making me wonder why this ledge is so high up. And then you have to take this powder keg and blow up this boulder, and he'll give you the permission to start carrying powder kegs. But you need to take it there, blow up the boulder, and then return back to him to confirm. Because if you don't, and you go through the race and you get the sword upgrade and you go back in time, you don't have any fucking powder kegs, and you need to start this all over again. My first run, I didn't even think about going back to him because I just opened up an entrance to a racing minigame and I just did that instead, and it completely slipped my mind, but that's if you even know where you're going. Some people I talked to have even complained that the destination of the boulder you're supposed to take this thing to is not made very clear. You have to sort of already know the layout of the area pretty well to know where you're taking this thing. I can't be too hard on it because the enemies appearing on the way there does make this a little bit interesting, but it's too unforgiving with its janky controls because Link won't fucking pick it up! Seriously, you can't drop it for even a second, and the obnoxious throwing controls where I accidentally put it down gently when I wanted to throw it, please, makes it easily the most annoying part of the game. I won't begrudge anyone for hating how often this game can stress the player out with the urgency. I remember distinctly being on the second day and not even having gotten so much as one of the Zora eggs in the Gerudo Fortress. I was freaking out because you need to have all the eggs found in a single 3-day run. Things like that make the game so goddamn tense, but that's why I love it so much. Yes, it asks for your patience, but in return, it engages you with its creativity. It has a puzzle where you alternate between 2 playable characters and have to figure out how to use the abilities of both to have them work together in making it to the other side. The game itself incentivizes the player to explore pretty much all the time, and this is even seen in the beginning of the game. Right off the bat, the first Great Fairy already teaches you that if you do favors for characters, you will get something out of it that will serve you a great benefit. I think what makes this sense of progress feel so real is that there are many things you'll find as a Deku Scrub that you can't do anything with just yet, but will be able to when you become a human. This makes earning your human form feel so rewarding because now you have this place you've been exploring and have access to various buildings and shops you either couldn't enter or just couldn't do anything with at the time. There's even a heart piece that previously teased the player with its presence, but is now reachable as a human. It's honestly a great feeling, and it really gives you this sense of power when you work to earn these things. As the game goes on, you get to feel like a serious progression is being made. The Bremen Mask is one of the many masks that only serves the purpose of awarding you something entirely separate from it, sort of making a bit of a chain, but on top of that, it also serves the function of making the game more interesting. Like the fact that you can do this. The Blast Mask gives the player the ability to essentially have infinite bombs if they choose to help the locals, and that's very useful because bombs are one of the many items that are removed when you turn back time, and it's something you get for just being at the right place at the right time. And this is also the case for the Kamaro Mask, which is yet another mask that only serves to make the game more interesting, and it also gives you a piece of heart. It's just something you find by knowing where to look and when. The game even rewards you hints if you bother to get the Garo Mask. Using this mask will allow you to fight various Garo Ninja warriors throughout the map, all of which will give you little hints about what to do next. This isn't to necessarily say that the game always has a 100% perfect sense of completion. Time travel starts things back over, so sometimes that can make the progress feel non-existent. You have things like the swamp becoming less poisonous after you complete the dungeon, and that can feel nice. Winter also becomes spring when you beat the Snowhead Temple. It's nice aesthetically, but ironically it's also more dangerous for your Goron form due to the bodies of water. Even though these things get reverted back to square one when you complete these respective areas, it still does feel nice for a little bit. That said, the Great Bay area has probably the worst effect of no completion, since pretty much nothing changes afterwards. The murky water dissipates, but you can't really leave or anything, so nothing particularly new happens. Lulu's voice is back too, but that's because of the New Wave Bossa Nova, not the temple. The only real thing that changes is you being able to get this heart piece from this guy who whined he couldn't go fishing, but now that he can, he decides to abandon his fishing career and do this stupid minigame, so it really isn't that different. It's even worse in the final area, where not a goddamn thing is different, but that doesn't mean that you don't feel like you've come a long way. There's really not an inherent need for the worlds of the game to change, since this is a journey about Link. Not that the world isn't important, but just that Link's journey is more or less a higher priority here. That said, despite the game's various problems, the no doubt absolute best part of the game is for sure the points towards the end. I had to save this for last because it's both literally the ending of this game, but it's also the best part of the game, and I felt it was the best way to end this very long segment. Majora's Mask's final dungeon and final two boss fights are the greatest example of a game going out with a goddamn bang. Ikana's castle is a relatively short obstacle course, and given the obnoxiousness of the well that preceded it, you would think it's a moment that I would dread coming to, but I actually love it so much. The goal is rather clear and laid out for you pretty simply. You have to get light in this room to be able to make it ahead. If the shortcut back to where you came from right here wasn't already an indicator that light and reflection play a big role here. Right off the bat, the player has the urge to go to the top, and then when they get there, they're able to put two and two together pretty easily. It gives a flow of priority to the game's mechanics and design. It will lead you out of interest one direction, and then what you will find will lead you to another one. You have this room with a ceiling that comes crashing down after a certain amount of time with this sense of consistent urgency. There's this really awesome platforming room that toys around with Deku Link's floating mechanic, which I thought was especially cool to include this late into the game, where you think his abilities would be useless. The only real complaint I have about it would be the obnoxious hole in the wall that you'll probably jump down into out of obligation, only to find that it leads you here. It's pretty infuriatingly poor placement for it, even though it needs to be here. The King's Lackeys are definitely a total treat and one of the best fights in the game, which says a lot given there's some fucking great fights in this game. It starts off with this constant pursuit from these two enemies who both attack you simultaneously despite which one you Z-target. The goal isn't even really spelled out for you, but killing them does nothing as they just come back. It's probably a stretch to say that it's easy for the player to figure out that they have to shoot the windows with fire arrows and use the light from said windows to finish them off. That alone is already hard to do with them constantly on your ass. But when I figured that out, I felt really smart and really proud of myself, and I don't often feel that way, so shut up and leave me alone. This fight utilizes the environment and requires that the player use the setting to their advantage. Not only do you have to defeat them, you have to make sure you defeat them near the sunlight. But when you're in the sunlight, they don't engage. It's so many different things you have to be thinking about while you fight. The genuine fucking surprise in his face when you figure out that you can just light the curtains and it'll bring light into the room. Was this guy really a king in his lifetime? You then have the second phase where you fight Igos du Ikana, who fights just like his lackeys but with a much larger range and much more powerful attacks. He also has this move where his head separates from his body and he bites you, which is very hard to avoid, and he uses it a lot. It builds pressure having to both avoid the separated head and his body, which will both come at you simultaneously. It overwhelms you having to focus on multiple things at once, but my absolute favorite thing about this goddamn fight is that you can use every single one of the transformation masks. Zora's boomerangs work well as a method of getting past their defenses, and the Deku Mask is great for stunning them, but the Gora Mask is absolutely amazing for managing to avoid the head. The only time in my life I'd avoid any head. In other Zelda games, specifically the ones that came later, it kind of felt like you would be given an item and that item would never serve any use to you again. But with Majora, you still use items that you got fucking hours ago, and that's just really cool. Stone Tower Temple is easily the best dungeon in the entire game, and one of the greatest dungeons in the Zelda franchise. This thing must have been designed by some architect or some shit, and the fact that this game was made in a year makes this temple almost seem impossible, but it's here. In a Zelda game that was developed in a year. This is real. This is a thing. The architecture of this dungeon is fucking crazy. Every single room is designed to work both upside down and right side up. It's a majorly complicated idea that they managed to pull off extremely well. You can tell that a lot of thought went into it, and it's just really fucking cool. It's not perfect. There's a bombable wall which isn't explained to the player whatsoever, which makes it seem a bit dependent on if the player has experienced any other Zelda games before this one. Also, if you break these two blocks, you have to go back and start completely over, which was really annoying. The goddamn puzzles to this dungeon are fantastic and a huge highlight for the game. There's this one that requires you to explore this confusing room without a dungeon map. You have no idea where anything is or how the room is laid out at all, and I honestly think that was purely intentional, but that kind of shit is all over the dungeon. There's the sunlight puzzle you encounter that requires the player to use angling and perspective to know where to strategically aim each ray of light and make haste, as the rays of light you create are only here for a temporary amount of time, made more intense by the black bows that regenerate infinitely. You can actually use them as a method of timing when you should stop charging up the nearby mirrors, which I think is pretty damn smart. There is even this puzzle where you have to frequently flip the dungeon upside down and right side up at various different intervals to get this block into this little hole. It's a creative use of 3D that I honestly wish I got more of in Ocarina of Time. It's unique how many times you re-enter rooms you already went to before from an entirely different angle. You really feel this huge sense of progress, but you also see the detail that went into the game. Various times throughout the dungeon, you run into these sun faces you can't do anything with because there is no light nearby. So when you get the light arrows, it opens up those various points you made a mental note of in which you couldn't do anything. It's a similar feeling of progress to the various things you notice are upside down and now have the ability to interact with. There's a point after you flip the dungeon where you generate a chest you can't come get yet, but you can use it to access another part of the room. The dungeon teases you, but still gives you a sense of progress, and I fucking love that. You could argue that having to leave the dungeon just to flip it is a bit annoying, and it is, but the fact that it's designed this way at all is really, really cool. There's this room with the statue enemies that you have to shoot in the vulnerable spot and entice to attack you, all while trying to avoid getting hit. The dungeon is filled with these moments of pure intensity that feel like a final test of what you learned thus far. It also has some pretty fucking cool boss fights. Garo Master, for example, is a boss framed almost like the Garos you're used to fighting, if you had the mask and bothered fighting them, but even that won't 100% help you, as the strategy used to kill him is still a bit different from them. Rather than blocking, because that's a horrible idea, you have to dodge his attacks, making him feel like just a step above the others. His fire blades as well make the fight a lot more difficult for your Zora and Deku forms, which limits your options. He's an opponent that thrives on pressuring the player. There is no ring of fire like the other Garo, but he is fast. If you stray away too far, he will teleport behind you like a goddamn anime character. He might be fun, but when you get his gimmick down pat, he's a breeze and in my opinion a bit boring upon replay. That's why I honestly prefer Gomez, a boss that consistently generates endless bats that he uses to hurt you, giving him both far range and close range attacks. You have these various pots throughout the room, and the bats as well, both of which give you magic, and never let the player be up a creek without a paddle, adding a layer of complexity to it. I love how they called these actual bats instead of keys. They're almost getting there. Almost. One of the surprisingly best strategies to restock on magic involves using the Zora form Sting Attack, which eats up magic fast, meaning the player has to make sure that they haven't completely lost their magic. There are so many different things that you have to pay attention to at once. The last 3 dungeons each had boss fights that were somewhat built around your new forms you gained from these areas respectively. This area didn't give you a new form, so you earn a new mask made exclusively for this boss battle called the Giant's Mask. This fight is fucking satisfying as hell. It makes you feel so huge and powerful. Yes, it probably is disappointing that you only use this mask one time in the entire game, but to be honest, I don't really mind it so much, just because of how goddamn fun it is. It's a mask that eats up your magic as you wear it, so rather than just being worried about your health, which you should be because this boss does a lot of damage, you're also worried about your magical energy. You're given these boulders that you and Twin Mold can both break that yield magic to keep the battle going. It's almost strategic trying to make sure Twin Mold isn't nearby as you break these pillars and gather more magic, on top of trying to conserve the pillars and make sure you don't go breaking all of them and attempting to keep him from breaking all of them as well. You're not just confined to using this giant's mask, however. You can actually kill it without the mask too, using exclusively your arrows. If you got good at using them, then this boss fight puts that skill to use. It's a great boss, and it's fun, but it's not very challenging upon replay and is a tad underwhelming given it doesn't correlate with the unique gimmicks in the dungeon, using the masks and flipping it upside down. That said, I still had an absolute blast fighting him without the mask, so I can't really complain too much. When you finally complete this section and have freed the 4 giants, you're actually now ready to face the Skull Kid. However, if you have every single mask collected in the game, you get a little extra segment just before the final boss. There are these 4 kids you have to give the masks to with an increasing number each time, hence why you need all 20. But interacting with these kids has you go through these little obstacle courses that correspond to the 4 abilities that you gained along the way. Boss runs for regular Link, a flying test for Deku Link, a water test for Zora Link, and a rolling test for Goron Link. They're simple and short, but they pretty much serve as a last test to these abilities to make sure the player has truly learned them completely. It's as if to see if the player has genuinely learned the transformations he earned thus far before the game can give you Fierce Deity Link. Finally, you have the final battle with Majora's Mask, the hardest fight in the entire game. The first phase of the final battle is a one-on-one fight. He's vulnerable on his back, and he only reveals his back in specific awkward angles during specific instances of his attacks. You can take these windows of opportunity to ruin him. Later in the battle, he summons the others to overwhelm the player. So the player is left with 2 choices. The first being to play as regular Link. This is the safer option, but also the slower option. It might be longer and more drawn out, but you don't die as much, and you come to find your mirror shield very, very useful in this context. It serves as a way of both hurting Majora and hurting the other masks. The second and cooler option is to play as Zora Link because it makes hitting Majora much easier, but it also makes it much more dangerous. If you get hit with a fire, the fight has to start completely over from the beginning, so it's up to the player which method they want to go with, as both are completely viable options to fighting Majora. The same can be said for the second phase, where Majora moves extremely quick. You're expected to chase after him with your Goron form, but that's not mandatory. You don't have to do that at all. You can just use the bunny hood or even far-ranged weapons. His only real attack in this phase is to sometimes shoot random beams of light at you. The real banger is the third and final phase of Majora, with its Majora damage and constant barrage of attacks. He never gives you a break, and a lot of the time will not let the player recover if they fall victim to his attacks. If one move knocks you down, you better expect about 7 or 8 follow-ups you can't do anything about, so you better make sure you don't get hit at all. He has a move that can break through your defenses and send you flying across the room. His hitboxes are massive, and to top it off, pun intended, he has these spike tops he throws out at random that can damage you, and if they fall over, they fucking explode. This is partially why them including Fierce Deity Link was so important. With him, the boss is a joke, but that's something you earned because you worked to get to this point. He's unforgiving, brutal, and difficult, but he's not impossible, and nothing can ever recapture that feeling of killing him for the first time.
Dawn of the final day. The aesthetics.
How I be when I come out the closet? Thank you. I have my own channel, you should check me out. I do analysis videos on Gonko Garage.
The last and final section of this analysis I wanted to go into was the aesthetics of this game, which I think are fucking amazing, but explaining why might be a bit difficult, so I think a good starting place would be in my philosophy on how a game should look. The Game Grumps Let's Play that I kept whining about starts like this.
Oh, hello!
Yo, this game's ugly as hell.
Oh my god, Aaron, please.
And obviously it was a joke, but I do know a lot of people genuinely believe that this game looks like ass. And the thing is, they're right. I also think that that doesn't really do it justice. So yeah, the game has polygonal graphics that are a bit dated and ugly, but the game is not beautiful for its graphic. Graphics don't matter as long as you get the general idea of what it's supposed to look like. What really matters is the aesthetic. You know, the color palette, the little details in the designs, the quirks to everyone's personality. These are much more important because they're what makes you recognize the game to begin with. To explain what I mean, look at the iconic castle from Mario 64. This castle is iconic, but it's not for the graphics or anything like that. What makes this castle stand out is the pillowy clouds and fluffy looking trees, the low hills and the concrete bridge, the white and red colors of the castle with the iconic picture of Peach at the top. You look more at these aspects than just the graphics. And this is why it infuriates me when people say Minecraft has bad graphics. It's not supposed to look like fucking Horizon Zero Dawn. The graphics are supposed to look blocky, because that's what makes it fucking Minecraft. Obviously, I'm not saying that graphics never matter, especially in the year of our Lord and Savior 2021. I mean, I wouldn't want to play a game like Ride to Hell Retribution, obviously, but that's because on top of having bad graphics, it has an obnoxious aesthetic and personality. If it even has one at all. It's like when people say that Animal Crossing is an ugly game, so you should play real games like The Last of Us 2. They're both perfectly fine games that try to achieve different aesthetics, and therefore comparing the two of them is completely unfair. A good starting place for Majora's Mask would be the models, which are mostly regurgitated from Ocarina of Time. You also play as Kid Link through most of it, although Zora Link and Fierce Deity Link are both clearly just recolors of Adult Link from Ocarina of Time. Deku Babas, with maybe exception of the ones that crawl towards you, Deku Scrubs, Keese, Wallmasters, Floormaster, because there's only one, Gibdos, Iron Knuckles, you get the point. That said, the models aren't exact 100% replicas. For example, Link's hair isn't as thick, he has a second belt around his torso, his shorts are shorter, and the rim of his boots are thinner. Oddly enough, he looks a tad more mature than he does in Ocarina, which I think is important for the themes of this game, but there's also a handful of enemies that did not appear in Ocarina. Gecko and Snapper, every single boss fight, this asshole, and so on. Things like the Moon or the Skull Kid are what essentially make this game stand out from Ocarina, showing that even though models like Anju, the Happy Mask Salesman, the Postman, both the young and old versions of Malon, Jesus Christ, this is literally just Ruto in a dress. There's still plenty that the game has that Ocarina didn't. I like that they specifically picked characters that really didn't play much of a big role in the previous game. Some awkward recreation of Saria or Zelda isn't gonna appear because they already played massive roles in Ocarina, so it would be really confusing. In a way, even though it's a completely different character, it feels a bit like you're getting to know characters that you didn't really get to know much in Ocarina. The animations are generally pretty well done and expressive. You have things like the moment of shock Ego Stewie kinda shows when you burn down the window curtains that are goofy and a bit odd, but there's also things like the horrifying, almost demented body language of the Skull Kid, or Majora's Mask's transformations emphasize an almost demonically unsettling presence. But the real highlight of the game is the colors, because this mask would not be nearly as horrifying if it weren't for the creepy purple and blue aura combined with the yellow eyes that make it so unsettling. But that's because the colors in this game are almost perfect. For example, Tattle and Tail are two fairies, one colored light, the other dark, which correlate with good and evil, and fits because the light one stays with you and the dark one stays with him. You have this cozy town with its tall brown buildings and gray concrete, but as you go back to the town, you see more grass to emphasize a much more mellow part of town. There's the swamp with its beautiful blend of purple, green, yellow, and gray to really build the image that it's tainted by darkness. The cold, unforgiving, transparent white in the Snowhead area, the bright sunny beach of Great Bay or the dark, dusk, dry presence of Ikana. Although I don't think that justifies the hideous red that shows up when an Octorok gets hit in this minigame. But these are few and far between, and for the most part, the visual aesthetics and framing are the stuff of fucking legend. There's a beautiful scene of Darmani accepting his death, characterized by his sparkling tears turning into bright stars that fly into the air, the heartwarming scene of a father embracing his child in Snowhead, shown in a white nothingness, yet the tone stays secure. I really like the scene of the Gibdo dad at the laboratory in Ikana Valley. No, but this scene is actually horrifying. It scared the shit out of me the first time I saw it. Once you have the Song of Healing, the scene gets followed up by a genuinely wholesome moment as the father and daughter reunite. You've got the passionate shot of fire as the Skull Kid accepts his death and Link salutes him. And my favorite might be the scene of Mikau floating into the dark black nothingness, but once Lulu comes into the frame, it all turns right side up, which emphasizes that life makes so much more sense around her, and that's where there's light. It becomes clear that making music with his band is the one thing that gives him life. Majora's Mask would not be nearly as unique without these scenes, but more so for things like the Ballad of the Windfish. It utilizes the creativity of the musical aspect presented in the game. The harmony of this part, and various parts like it, is absolutely beautiful and crafted so masterfully and with so much care. That's because a lot of detail goes into the design of this game. There's this platform over here with a paper airplane just thrown here for the sake of being an interesting little detail the player can find, and I didn't even know that this was here until now. I don't even know why it's here, it's just kinda here. I love it. The various areas throughout the game have a level of variety to them that I really have to admire, especially for how interconnected a lot of it feels. The large openness of the swamp areas, or the tightly compact sewage system that leads to the fucking beautiful and dreamy observatory. But the part that I think definitely creates the tone of Majora's Mask the best is the sound design. The sound effects to Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are fucking iconic. Everyone recognizes the transition to a new day. It's one of the most iconic things in gaming, but sound effects like these are just as recognizable too if you grew up with this game. It's distinct in its sound, and each sound satisfyingly conveys what it needs to convey in a way that only Zelda could. When you kill a monster, you hear the slice and it blends perfectly into the beast's scream. When a spirit rises through the air, you hear their powerful presence. Skull Kid sounds fucking horrifying. Even the sound effect of continuing a conversation is iconic. I even love the little Deku Scrub pitter patter. It's so fucking cute. But there's also improvements to previous sound effects. There are points where you get something a bit strange. The cutscene of how Tattle and Tail met Skull Kid has this shivering sound effect that repeats, and it's really annoying with how they just kind of kept reusing the same sound again and again. You have this obnoxious fucking baby.
I want to slap it. I want to slap the head. Have you not seen all the videos of the people slapping the heads of children?
I want to slap the baby.
Shut up! Be quiet! Shut up! He can cry so fucking loud, he puts out a fire. Fucking legend. These are few and far between. However, they're instances that often can ruin the tone or make it difficult to take what is meant to be a serious moment completely serious. I don't expect the game to be 100% perfect in presentation, so the little nitpicks don't change how distinct this game is at all. When it comes to the aesthetic, people fucking live for Majora's Mask. Fan art, the music, it's all some of the best I've ever seen. The 3D Zeldas are great at building tone, and that's something that I feel Majora handled even better than Ocarina. In areas like the Poison Swamp, The tune is laid back but eerie at the same time. It has this murky, groggy atmosphere to it that emphasizes a calm yet mysterious feeling. That area's dungeon has this creepy, quiet chant that makes it feel tribal. The mini-boss themes are just fucking listen to them, they're fire! Same for the boss theme, which starts with this huge crash of notes before transitioning into this catchy beat that builds back up into this crescendo like a fucking engine. I love the beautiful somber song and tone of seeing these giants. It feels so grand and legendary, not to mention mysterious. These sounds are well known and used somewhat across the series consistently, but it's important to note their upbeat nature and loud tone. They do a phenomenal job at giving you a sense of accomplishment. One of the coolest little touches they add in is when you learn new songs. In this one, for example, he teaches you the song, you play it correctly, and then you both play it together. What you played begins to mesh with what he plays together in a beautiful ensemble, and the dreamy and surreal visuals accompanying it make it one of the most fantastic parts of the game. Little details like this are what I live for, like the Zoras playing songs that come from the previous games, such as the cave theme in Link to the Past. But where I think they went absolutely all out was, of course, my favorite song in the entire game, the Stone Tower Temple theme. What sets this song apart from all the other ones in the game is one thing. It's for the best dungeon, but it's also made by musical geniuses. On top of the structure of the dungeon being complex, the song is too. However, it does have elements to it in reverse that sound like the original. Take a listen. That's fucking awesome, and the fact that they could pull that off is actually impressive. It shows how much attention they paid to the details, but on top of that, it's nice symbolism too, symbolizing the theme of death and life being built into each other, almost like a yin and yang, and it pairs well with the fact that you can flip this dungeon upside down. The aesthetic to Majora's Mask is up there with Persona 5 as one of the most godliest games with its presentation. No amount of flaws I can nitpick in specific parts of the game will even make a dent in the creative personality this game has going for it. So with that, we can finally reach our conclusion. Majora's Mask is my second favorite game of all time. It's aged very well in some spots and horribly in others, and it's hard to enjoy it the way people might have back in the day. It's unforgiving and far more difficult than Ocarina of Time. It's mentally taxing, stressful, harsh, and hard-hitting in a way that sticks with you. It's a surreal story, dark, philosophical, depressing, all of which is impressive if you remember that this is a Zelda game. So it's aged and has a lot of dated problems that make it infuriating, but that's sort of what I love about it. I love that this is a game that you work with, that demands your respect and earns it. But on top of that, unless you're already into the Zelda games, it's a game that I would consider to be an acquired taste, especially by today's standards. I've seen a lot of people who seem to have this strange perception about why so many people prefer this game over Ocarina of Time, thinking it's just because they're edgy or some bullshit. I love this game because it's a journey of hardship and death, which is impressive for a kid's game, yes, but also because of the complex and brutal nature of its gameplay, which manages to both teach the player how to play in a subtle fashion, but also gives freedom to the player to play it how they wish. This was an element that I felt was grossly missing from Ocarina, as much as I still have love for that game and appreciate it for what it is. I feel like if a game is going to be linear, it should try to drag you by the nose much less than this. There should also be a set path, but don't take control away from the player and instead give them things they can do, as opposed to just constantly telling them things they can't. It becomes clear that Majora's Mask is a game filled with problems that are an issue only because of its age and likely time constraints, but it's not a masterpiece because of those flaws. I'm not that pretentious. No, it's a masterpiece despite those flaws, as those are issues that are only really something I would think is present purely due to the context of how this game was created. The fact that it's as good as it is, despite the situation of its development, is what makes it a masterpiece in my opinion, because this game's complexity is very impressive when you take that into consideration. The whole reason this game works is because it's a game that deals with something almost anyone can relate to, the feeling of grief. This is a game I would have played as a kid had I had an expansion pack, but I think that gave it more weight at the time. It allowed me to complete my childhood and find a missing piece of it when I was a teenager, and in a way that still gives me nostalgia for this game, even though that really wasn't that long ago. I love Majora's Mask, and I honestly couldn't ask for a better sequel to a game that's already an important part of my life. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe. I'm sorry that this particular video took me a whole year to finish. I didn't think that would happen. Mostly just been motivation getting in the way and working on Mirsa and so many other things. But I've got plenty of other videos planned in the works that are coming out soon. I've got a special surprise planned by the end of the month that hopefully I'll get done. I can't guarantee. Regardless, hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Peace out.